Josh Hennig here in the Ocean Casino Resort Studios here on 97.3 ESPN. After the trade deadline, after the Flyers have moved on from 3 players, they'll be back on the ice tomorrow, and you can catch all the action on ABC, the Kraken and the Flyers at 12:30, and the man will be on the call again will be ESPN's Bob Wischusen, and he joins us again here on 97.3 ESPN. Bob, welcome back. How you doing today?
I'm doing fine. How are you?
Doing good. So for someone like you, I've always wanted to know, when you have a game the day after a deadline, like what's going on with the NHL today, is there a part of you that's like looking at the deadline and just saying, thank God I have the game after the deadline so I actually know what some of these teams look like?
Yeah, I mean, because I had a game last night. We were calling Seattle, Colorado, and during warm-ups, we weren't 100% sure who was actually going to even play in the game. So is it less stressful to call games after the trade deadline than before? Absolutely. We were calling people from ESPN last night and even scanning social media to see, based on the rumors, if the guys that we were watching in warmups were still going to be on the ice when the game started. Nico Sturm played for Seattle. He was traded during the day to Florida yesterday. Jake Wallman was at practice in the morning. And then we found out when we got back for the game that he was headed to Edmonton, and a different guy was in the lineup. So, yeah, there's no doubt. It's much easier to do a game the day after the trade deadline when you actually know that the roster is set and that there are not going to be any surprises tomorrow morning. Hopefully they'll be able to tell us who's actually in the lineup.
So with that being said, obviously, Bob, you've caught a lot of the Flyer games this year, and you're seeing the team in different iterations. One of the questions we've been having throughout the day here on 97.3 ESPN with our audience is, are the Flyers going in the right direction? So I ask you, as someone who has watched the Flyers this year, do you think the Flyers are going in the right direction?
I think they are. I do think that there has been development. I mean, even the development of Matvei Michkov alone points them in the right direction. He seems to embrace wanting the puck in big spots, and he seems to be a guy that you're going to have as a foundational piece. Look, like, they're getting capital back for these guys they've moved. Now we'll see what they do with it, but that's all you can do. And all you can do is get younger, and all you can do is get draft capital and then spend draft capital and get new players, and hopefully you pick the right guys. So it's going to be a few years before you find out if the investment that they're making in the trades they're making right now work out. But, they're one of those teams where they have, in my opinion, maximized the talent level that this group is capable of. And I think John Tortorella last year and this year has gotten everything that you can possibly get out of this group. And this group still is just barely on the outside looking in. And at some point, you kind of have to be honest with yourself about what you are. And then once you're honest with yourself about what you are, then you do what they're doing. And you make trades of guys that you know are not going to be here 3 or 4 years from now. And hopefully whatever youth movement finally arrives and kind of bears fruit, is ready to make the playoffs and be a contender again. So, yeah, I mean, I totally understand what they're doing, and I agree with the philosophy.
We're talking with Bob Wischusen. He'll be on the call tomorrow on ABC for the Kraken versus Flyers at 12:30. Of course, you can hear the game also right here on 97.3 ESPN. Bob, if I could backtrack what we said about Michkov, you mentioned about his development this year. Is there something that you have observed or you have heard in that development this year that maybe has stood out to you the most?
That by the time we arrive at this point in the season, he's still productive. He's, I think, even becoming more productive as the year goes on, and that he has not broken at all mentally under John Tortorella. And I say that from a standpoint of, like, I don't want to make it sound like John Tortorella is anything other than the perfect coach for him, because I really think he is. I think he's the perfect kind of push the right button at the right time guy to coach a young player hard when it needs to be hard, like massage him when he needs to be massaged, but there are times where, and look, he's just flat out benched him and gotten in his face at times where that's been necessary. But also there are times where, you have to kind of push a guy and see how he responds. And based on how he's playing right now, I think he's proven that he's responded well. So I think there's a mental toughness there that you have to see that it shows up when it gets tested. And I think it's been tested, and I think it's shown up. So to me, that's really encouraging for a guy as young as he is.
You mentioned about Tortorella, about the kind of coach that he is. Obviously, this is not Tort's first stop, right? He's been with the Rangers. He's been with Vancouver, with Columbus. He's been around the league for a while. But there does seem to be a bit of maybe an evolution to an extent with him as well. Have you seen that this season?
I definitely have seen that. And I've talked to Ryan Callahan about that, who played for him. Ryan Callahan, he experienced it firsthand. He definitely thinks that Torts is a little different now than he was then. But at the same time, Callie will tell you, and he'll tell you firsthand, that he was one of, if not the best coach he ever played for. He is the classic example, almost like a kid looking back on a parent who was tough on them, and you didn't like it when you were going through it. But then when you came out the other side and grew up and looked back on it, you're like, oh, okay, that person cared about me, that person loved me, that person was teaching me a lesson, and I'm better for it. And, Callie said, I became a much better player, and I became a much better, human being for having played for John Tortorella. And he thinks that Matvei Michkov is going to go through and develop and experience the exact same thing that he experienced. And, I guess speaking firsthand, that's all you want, right? You just want to talk to somebody that's gone through it firsthand. And I would be really encouraged if I were a Flyers fan from that standpoint, because I'm talking to someone who went through it firsthand.
What's interesting with the Flyers, with Tortorella as well, is that the fact that you have this front office, guys like Keith Jones, guys like Danny Briere. I know you and I have talked about the Flyers front office before, about how these guys are more than just former players. These are guys who have been invested in the sport for decades, and they have basically looked at Tortorella and entrusted him with the development of this team, to the point, Bob, where they said, hey, Joe Farabee and Morgan Frost, you guys aren't developing the way we want under Tortorella. We're moving on. So it's a very interesting dynamic between, Bob, guys that like Keith Jones, who are heading up the operation, and their entrustment of Tortorella in the development.
Yeah, you hire John Tortorella for a reason. Right, you go in with eyes wide open, and you hire John Tortorella for your roster for a reason, because you want your players developed a certain way, right? Like in the NFL, you would hire Bill Parcells for a reason, because you want a developmental, button-pushing, mental coach to come in and develop and teach your guys, and take guys that aren't winning and develop a culture, and not only turn them into winners, but kind of turn them into hopefully sustained winners. And, there's no doubt, if the guys aren't, he's done this in other places, and, won a cup and been a Jack Adams Award winner, and has developed. Again, I'm talking to somebody in Ryan Callahan, they'll tell you firsthand, he knows how to develop players. So if guys aren't developing under him, you don't talk about the large sample size of the coach who's done it over and over again and reject that. You kind of look at maybe the individual player and say, all right, you're probably not the right player for us then. Let's look at a different type of player that's going to flourish under a coach that knows how to develop guys. And so, yeah, I agree. I think it is sticking with the plan if you're sticking with Torts.
Couple more for Bob Wischusen, of course, ESPN broadcaster and commentator. He will be on the call for Kraken versus Flyers tomorrow on ABC at 12:30 p.m. Obviously in Philadelphia, Bob, as you as well as anyone is aware, goaltending has been a conversation for probably longer than either of us have been alive, because basically since Bernie Perrant was here, it's always been a question. So when you look at Sam Ersson, what do you think the future is for him? Because he's the guy right now, but is he always going to be that guy? Because a lot of times in the NHL now, it's about a tandem. It's not about just number one guy.
Yeah, I don't know, and I don't think they know yet. I mean, even Torch said it the other day. He was looking at these last 20 to 25 games and saying that, right? Like, this really is when you're on the playoff bubble. And look, they've kind of tipped their hand, right? When you trade Lawton away, when you make some of these moves, you're kind of saying, all right, we are more selling than buying. So we're not thinking that we are a playoff team that's going for it. We're not the Rangers on the bubble acquiring players trying to win. We're more trading guys off and selling and accumulating assets for the future.
All right, Bob, before I let you go, obviously, the Flyers are not one of the contenders, so I got to get from you. Florida, they just acquired Brad Marchand today. The Flyers fans just saw Winnipeg last night, how good they can be. This league, there's a handful of teams that are really good. We know what the Stars have done at the deadline, what Colorado at the deadline. What are the teams that you are looking at the most as we get closer to the postseason?
I still have a tremendous amount of respect for Winnipeg. I still think they are a really deep, really good team that has a culture there and has a group of guys that probably are going to look at each other and be like, hey, look, everybody else around the league, look what they did. Everybody's gunning for us. And that I think will create a further bond in their room, because they just went out and got a couple of kind of, try-hard role players. They didn't get stars. The Stars got stars. The Avalanche got stars. Obviously, Florida added a star, and I guess a couple stars when you factor Seth Jones in as well. So, yeah, I mean, look, the Lightning significantly upgraded. They're certainly going for it. Florida's going for it. Dallas is going for it. Colorado's going for it. Edmonton, all of those teams are factors. But, there's part of me that's pulling for Winnipeg because I think they've earned certainly my respect and everybody's respect at this point.
He's Bob Wischusen. He'll be on the call tomorrow on ABC for the Kraken versus Flyers game at 12:30. And we appreciate taking him time to join us here on 97.3 ESPN. Bob, great insights. We'll talk again soon.
Okay, thanks.